Hi guys! I wanted to put together this short video for Pioneer Day and I wanted to have it out by the time it was the 24th, but that didn't happen, so hopefully you'll still be able to enjoy these stories. So today in our Relief Society lesson, we were talking all about family history and pioneer heritage, and somebody said something along the lines of, you need to embrace your roots. And all of a sudden it just hit me that my daughter wore a shirt yesterday on her birthday. Well, her birthday is on the 23rd, so the day before Pioneer Day. She happened to wear this shirt that said, embrace your roots. And I remember it's really funny, I had just dyed her hair on her birthday. I colored her hair, that's what she wanted. She just wanted it touched up. And so when I read her shirt, I thought that was really funny that it went with her hair. We had just touched up her roots and colored her hair, and she happened to be wearing this shirt that said embrace your roots, and so I was kind of laughing about that. And then I realized, oh my goodness, there's that message on her shirt, embrace your roots. And that's all we talked about today, and it was just so timely. And it's just funny because we always call her our Pioneer Day baby because she came the day before Pioneer Day. So anyways, I just thought that led perfectly into this video that I wanted to make today. I just love the 24th. I love Pioneer Day. I love talking about family history and heritage, but one of the things I love the most is the stories of faith. I think when I read these stories, especially when they're my own ancestors, it helps build that faith inside of me because I think, well, this is where I come from. I come from these people of faith. And if they can do that and they can make it through those hard times and make those sacrifices, so can I. So I love it, absolutely love it. And so I wanted to share some pioneer stories from my own family tree. These are some stories that I shared today with my kids for Pioneer Day. So I wanted to share some of those with you. And then also, when we were in Kanab last weekend, we had the opportunity to go on this adventure tour with a guy who went by the name of Cowboy John. And he shared some incredible faith-building stories with us. And so he said, everything I share with you is a true story, and some of them were familiar to me, and there was one that stood out, and I know I've heard that before. I said to my family, I've heard that before, and my sister and her husband said the same. So I went and Googled it, and sure enough, I found the story, so I'm going to share that with you guys. He said he was able to verify it in the actual journal of his friend's ancestor. So his friend invited him over and showed this journal where it shared that story. So anyways, I just loved hearing about it. So I'm just going to share a few of my favorites with you guys, and hopefully you enjoy these stories, and feel free to comment down below in this video and share some of your own pioneer heritage stories. So this experience is known as the resurrection experience of Zeke Johnson, and I'm just going to read it from his own words. And this is in several places. I'm going to read the version from Family Search, but it's also in BYU Archives, and I've seen it in a lot of other places. So here we go. He says, I have been requested to relate an experience I had in 1908 or 1909 in San Juan County. I was just making a home in Blanding, this is in Utah, and the whole county there was covered with trees and sagebrush. I was working hard to clear the ground to plant a few acres of corn. We had 5 acres cleared and started to plant the corn. My little boy, Roy, 7 or 8 years old, was there to help me plant the corn. I'd plow around the piece, and then he'd plant the furrow with corn. Then I'd cover it and plow again. While I was plowing on that piece of ground, I discovered there were ancient houses there. That is, the remnant of them. As I was plowing around, I noticed that my plow had turned out the skeleton of a small child. The skull and the backbone, most of the bones, of course, were decayed and gone. Part of the skeleton was there, so I stopped immediately as my plow had passed it a little. I turned and looked back against the bar of the plow between the handles. As I was looking at that little skeleton that I had plowed out and wondering, all of a sudden, to my surprise, I saw the bones begin to wiggle, and they began to change position and to take on different color. And within a minute, there lay a beautiful little skeleton. It was a perfect little skeleton. Then I saw the inner parts of the natural body coming in, the entrails, etc. I saw the flesh coming on, and I saw the skin come on the body, where the inner parts of the body was complete. A beautiful head of hair adorned the top of the head, and in about a half a minute after the hair was on the head, it had a beautiful crystal decoration in the hair. It was combed beautifully and parted on one side. In about a half a minute after the hair was on the head, the child raised up on her feet. She was lying a little on her right side, with her back toward me. Because of this, I was able to discern the sex of the child. But as she raised up, a beautiful robe came down over her left shoulder, and I saw it must be a girl. She looked at me and I looked at her, and for a quarter of a minute, we just looked at each other, smiling. Then my ambition was to get a hold of her. I said, "Oh, you beautiful child," and I reached as if I would embrace her, and she disappeared. That was all I saw, and I stood there and I wondered and I thought for a few minutes. My little boy was wondering why I was there because he was down at the other end of the row, anxious to come and plant the corn. Now, I couldn't tell that story to anyone because it was so mysterious to me and such. Why should I have such a miraculous experience? I couldn't feature a human being in such a condition as to accidentally plow that little body out and see it come alive. A body of a child about 5 to 7 years old, I'd say. I couldn't tell that story to anyone until finally, one day, I met a dear friend of mine, Stake Patriarch Wayne H. Redd of Blanding. He stopped me on the street and said, "Zeke, you have had an experience on this mesa. You won't tell. I want you to tell it to me." Well, I told it to him, and then he had me tell it to other friends, and since then I have told it in 4 temples in the United States, and many meeting houses and many socials, fast meetings, and at conference times. I wondered, and it worried me for years, as to why I was allowed to see it. A common man like me, uneducated? Why was I, just a common man, allowed to see such a miraculous manifestation of God's power? One day, as I was walking alone with my hoe on my shoulder, going to hoe some corn, something said, "Stop under the shade of that tree for a few minutes and rest." This just came to me, and I thought I would. So I stopped there, and this was given to me. It was in answer to my prayer. I prayed incessantly for an answer as to why I was privileged to see that resurrection. I was told why. When the child was buried there, it was either in time of war with the different tribes, or it was winter time when the ground was frozen and they had no tools to dig deep graves. If it were during time of war, they couldn't possibly take time to dig a deep grave. They just planted that little body as deep as they could under the circumstances. The sorrowing mother knew that it was such a little shallow grave. In her sorrow, she cried out to the little group that was present. "That little shallow grave," she said. "The first beast that comes along will smell her body, and it will dig her up and scatter her to the 4 winds. Her bones will be scattered all over these flats. There just happened to be a man present holding the priesthood, a Nephite or a Jaredite. I don't know which because they had both been in this country. I've been in their houses and I know it. This man said, 'Sister, calm your sorrows. Whenever that little body is disturbed or uncovered, the Lord will call her up and she will live.' Since that time, I have taken great comfort, great cheer and consolation and satisfaction with praise in my heart and soul, until I haven't the words to express it, that it was I that uncovered that little body." It says, "Thank you for listening to me. I just can't tell this without crying." I have a link down below. If you want to check it out, it'll take you into Family Search where you can read the story for yourself. And there's also an actual recording of him telling the story. It was recorded by his grandson in 1976. So I was going to share his version in his own words, but the quality wasn't so good, so I decided to read it instead. Anyways, feel free to check that out. It's just an amazing story. And it turns out I'm related to him. I clicked on View Relationship, and it shows that we are seventh cousins 4 times removed. This next experience is from my great-great-grandmother who joined the church over in Germany and immigrated here with her family. And so here it goes. It says, on March 25th, 1895, her little daughter Elise, only 7.5 years old, died. Joanna was broken-hearted and could not stop crying. Then, one night, Joanna had a dream in which Elise came to her. Elise came from a, quote, university, although she had actually only attended the regular school. She saw a field in which workers were gathering sheaves of grain and stacking them in large piles, and she also saw a black hole. Pointing to this field, Elise commanded, quote, Mother, you go and work there. If you don't go and work there, you will have to go into the black hole. After this dream, Joanna wept no more, for she realized Elise was happy, that she was with other people, and that she was gaining knowledge. Joanna also realized that she must find this group of people she had seen in the dream. After Joanna was able to get around following her illness, she visited different churches. She could not decide to join any of them. They did not seem to satisfy her. One evening, she and Carl went to a church called the Blue Cross or Brethren Church. Several of the people who were attending this meeting joined that evening, but Joanna and Carl went home. One of her neighbors belonged to the Baptist church and asked her to join that church. Joanna told her she would make it a matter of prayer and ask the Lord if this was the true church. She did not receive an answer to her prayer, so she did not join the Baptist church. Soon after that, this neighbor died. After her neighbor's death, Joanna had a dream. Quote, I dreamed that 3 men came to me and asked me to go with them, so I went. When I got there, I saw a hole full of water. One of the men took me to this water and baptized me. They told me this hole represented the prayers the Latter-day Saints are sending to their Heavenly Father. I asked these men if they belonged to any of the churches I had visited, and one of them answered no. A few years later, I had another dream. I saw myself in a green meadow. My clothes were dirty and torn. I didn't have any shoes and stockings on my feet. As I looked up, I saw Jesus Christ standing before me. It frightened me very much. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, All is well. Listen to what I'm going to tell you. Look west. I looked and I saw a huge building with a man standing at the top of it. He had a trumpet in his hand. The Lord told me that if I would do as that man told me to do, I would gain salvation. After this, Jesus disappeared. Joanna had still another dream. Quote, I was very hungry and I was going into a field and saw some nice corn. I ate until I was satisfied, and then I thought of my relatives and friends, and so I filled my apron with corn and spread it around to all of my friends and relatives. The corn was the gospel of Jesus Christ. On October 31st, 1899, in the city of Königsberg, Germany, she had been ill for several years and didn't believe she was ever going to recover. Elder Charles Bitter and Elder Richard Clausen from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints were tracting in the building where Joanna lived. As they were distributing their tracts, they saw a pale-faced woman standing with her hand on the doorknob. They went over to her and handed her a tract. She looked at it with wonder, and then she looked at the missionaries, and then looked again, never saying one word. They were 2 of the men whom she had seen in her earlier dream. Without conversation, the missionaries went on down the street. 2 weeks later, the missionaries returned. When they arrived and knocked, Joanna swung the door wide open and said, "Come in," with great urgency. They took a seat by a little table, and she got the Bible and set it down before the missionaries. Looking them straight in the face, she said, "You are the true servants of God who have brought me the true gospel of Jesus Christ, which I have waited for all my life." So it was necessary for her husband to give consent before she could be baptized. And he didn't want her to be baptized because he was sure that it would kill her because she had been so ill. So after a great deal of persuasion from Joanna and the elders, her husband Carl gave his consent. And he went with the elders on a Saturday night to help them chip a hole in the ice that was 3 feet thick in preparation for her baptism, which was going to happen the following day. So it was icy cold water, it was winter, and she was sick. The story goes, Brother John Hepler testifies concerning the baptism. Quote, before we left the home, however, something happened. There were 3 others to be baptized before that night, and before we left, we were going to hold prayer. The house was darkened, and the spirit of hell entered that home and looked like it was going to destroy our work. We started to sing a hymn and offered a prayer, and the darkness left, and sweetness entered, and the spirit was wonderful. I knew what that awful feeling was. I knew the difference between the spirit of Satan and the spirit of God. I knew what it was when it all vanished. After the prayer was offered, there sat Brother Plew in the corner weeping, and his children wept bitterly to think that Joanna was going out on that night to be baptized, away where it was very cold in 2 feet of snow. We went there, and Brother Bitter baptized her and the other ladies, and when we returned, everything was beautiful in their home. It was my privilege to confirm her a member of the church, and when we stood there, it seemed we were lifted from the floor. We blessed her as she had an ailment. A few days after, when we called on her, she told us she had been healed. So the next year, her husband was baptized, and then a year after that, they had a child, and the story goes on. Joanna says, I had been working all day, and when evening came, I was very tired. I then took my babies and went to bed. As I went to sleep, I had a dream. I dreamed that I went on a long journey. I was barefoot, and I was walking. I came over the Mississippi River. I crossed the bridge and walked to Salt Lake City, Utah. It was a long, tiresome trip. I came up against a big mountain, and when I looked upon that mountain, it was full of rose bushes, and the roses were blooming. The roses were dark red and very large. Between the roses was a narrow path, and it led to the top of the mountain. As I started up the path, I had to hold on to the rose bushes to climb up. The thorns stuck in my hands and my fingers, and they started to bleed. When I was halfway up, I was tired and I wanted to stop. At the foot of the mountain, there stood a man, and he said I should keep climbing till I reached the top. When I did reach the top, everything was glorious. I could never begin to express the feeling that came over me when I stood there. As I stood there, the Father and the Son stood over me. I kneeled before them and asked if I could stay there, as I liked it so well. He said, no, you have to go back. I felt so sorry that I had to leave that place. I thought I'd try once more, and I asked if I could stay. But the Father again said, no, you have to go back. There is work for you to do. I didn't like to go back and take that sick body up again. I didn't even think of my babies. While I was standing there thinking, the Father said to me, wait. He stepped aside so I could see the spaces between us. He stood on the east side and I stood on the west. From the east corner, there came a group of men marching in a group of 3, the president and his counselors. They were dressed in temple clothes. They looked so glorious that it hurt my eyes to look at them. There were thousands that passed by. They walked from east to south. I called it a big cloud. Then the Father said, this is my power and my authority through which I work upon the earth. Then I started back. It didn't take me long to get back, and I took up my body again. When I awoke, I was as weak as a newborn baby. As soon as the Spirit came back, I gained my strength. It took 3 days and 3 nights for this experience. Carl, my husband, had his arm around my neck when I came back, and he was not strong enough to hold me. I struggled so as I did not want to come back. One evening, the elders had visited with them until late at night. After they had gone and the family had been asleep for about an hour, a loud knock came on the table. A voice said, go to Zion to the covenant people. When Joanna heard the voice, she was upset. She prayed to the Lord that he might make it possible for them to go. Her prayer was answered. The oldest son, Herman, left in 1901. The second son left for America in 1905, and their father, Carl, left in December 1906. So it says Joanna remained in Germany with the rest of her family, and she went in search for the genealogy and records of her forefathers and the birth certificates of her two brothers. And so she wanted to do this work for them, and so she goes about and she visits this minister, and she tries to get information and birth records from this minister. But he was unable to give her any information, and so she made a second visit and still accomplished nothing. So then she went a third time, and the minister assured her that he could not give her any information. So the story goes on. It says, Joanna was very much discouraged, and she went along the road weeping. As she wandered back, the feeling came over her that she should kneel down and pray and ask the Lord to tell her the birthplaces of her two brothers. She had great faith and believed that if one was humble and asked in faith for something, it would be given. So Joanna knelt down at the side of the road, and with other people passing by, she asked the Lord to tell her the name of the place where her two brothers had been born. A bright light shone around her head. A voice within the light said just one word, Falconhurst. She thanked the Lord for answering her prayer. She ran back to the minister, and she was so excited and happy that she could not talk. When the minister came to the door and he saw Joanna standing there once more, he did not even open the screen. He said, Mrs. Plew, you were here 3 times, and I told you that I couldn't find anything for you, and now you are here again. Then Joanna told him that she knew the name of the place now. It was Falconhurst. He asked her how she knew this, and she told him that the Lord had told her. He said, nonsense, but he opened the door and he invited her in. He asked her why she had been given the name of a different town before, and then she told him that Falconhurst was the original name of the town in which her brothers were born, and that the name had been changed. She had only heard her mother talk of the town by its new name. They went together in a different room where the records were kept on rows of shelves, and took a book down from the shelf and opened it. Right at the top of the page were the names of her two brothers. And it's so neat to look up the record of her brothers and to see right there, she did their work back in 1900 and again in 1909. So that was super exciting to see that. So there were many times in her life where she again suffered from poor health. The story goes on to say, early in the year 1929, Joanna's strength came to a pretty low ebb and was almost run out. Bishop Paul C. Child was called to her home by Carl and her son-in-law Otto because she was suffering from a hemorrhage which it seemed nothing could stop. There was considerable excitement among the children, almost to the point of despair because it wasn't a pleasant thing to see. As they wept in despair, there came the voice of this saintly woman, quote, It's all right. If I must die, it is just like passing into the next room. The bishop will administer to me, and if the Lord wills, I will live. And the bishop administered to her, and the fountain of blood was closed, and she lived. They thought her sacrifice had been enough and released her of her work in Relief Society in 1929. So Carl passed away first, and then Joanna passed away a few years later. And when Carl passed away, Harold B. Lee spoke at his funeral, and this is what he said, in which he said, I shall merely close by praying that Sister Plew will be sustained by your unfaltering faith. And I want to say to the congregation that I think there has never been one in our midst who has lived too saintly, who has drawn so close to heavenly things, and who has been permitted so much to see and know things beyond this life, as has this dear little German mother. So as soon as Joanna and Carl had received their endowments in the temple, it says that they labored diligently in the temple to do the work for all of their ancestors. This was so important to them. Even when they weren't feeling well, they would go to the temple and do the work anyways. And it says, Elder Charles R. Jones, president of the Salt Lake Temple, said, I have remarked many times to my companion that I thought they were the most angelic couple I had ever seen in the temple. They did their work without complaint and were always willing to help. I have so many amazing stories in my family history, so I think I'm going to make some more videos down the road where I'm going to share some more of these incredible miracles. I just love hearing these stories about the sacrifices my ancestors made when they decided to join the church and all the miracles that resulted from their faith. I absolutely love it. If you enjoyed these stories and you want to check out some of the fun Pioneer Day traditions we have in our family, click on this video right here and check it out. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you soon with another Happy Lady video.